The science of reading is the latest in literacy education. But is it for real or just another education bandwagon? Every few years, there's a new reading or literacy bandwagon to jump on. The buzzwords or acceptable techniques abound. Phonics, whole language, close reading, balanced literacy, accelerated reader, IXL, Reader Rabbit, reading recovery, phonemic awareness, just to name a few. And the most recent addition to the list is the science of reading. Well, I've been around the block a few times, and let me tell you, I've seen it all and quietly ignored quite a bit of it and done my own thing for years once I realized what real reading instruction looked like. You see, years ago when I realized my youngest son had dyslexia, and apparently my father as well, I started to question all of the things I thought I knew about literacy and learning to read. So if you ever wonder if your students are learning to read despite your efforts instead of because of your efforts, and if the science of reading is the real deal, this episode is for you. I'm Lisa Burns, a teacher success coach, veteran elementary teacher, and mom of 5, and this is the Teach Joyfully podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Are you missing out? Team H.O.P.E Insiders get extra encouragement, tips and tricks, surprise freebies, and more. Become a H.O.P.E Insider today and get access to all kinds of freebies at www.hopeineducation.com/vault. The thing about education is there's a study or research, I say that loosely, to support just about anything a publisher wants to put out there. And while there is a lot of great research that's been properly done about reading and literacy, there's just as much that's not. So we have to really check the research before we jump on the latest approaches. In addition, we learn new things from brain research all the time about how kids learn and how the brain works. And we need to incorporate that into our instructional approaches on a regular basis. So it takes time to do that. We have to go back at least once a year and review what's new, what's working, and what else do we know now that we didn't know before. So often old concepts and methods of teaching get rebranded, perhaps updated as well. And that doesn't mean that these older concepts don't work or aren't good, because many of them are. But we need to recognize what is being sold to us and call a spade a spade. Then we need to see what's being added or taken away and why this particular method fell out of fashion in the first place. Did it not work, or was there just a new shiny object everyone wanted to try instead? I like to think of education like fashion. Bell-bottom jeans were a thing in the 70s, and now they've come back, but we call them flared jeans instead. They're updated a bit in the shape and are made of new technology, i.e. better fabric, but they are still the original concept, even though it feels new and cool. Well, education is the same way. Things go out of fashion and come back into fashion with the shiny new packaging, a few updates, and many times a new name, but the underlying concepts are the same. And that means we have lots of data on whether or not it actually worked in the past or not. So a few examples of things that have come back are close reading. It's not new. It was a thing back in the 80s and early 90s. Elkonin boxes aren't new, they've been around forever. They just fell out of fashion, even though some of us secretly hung on to them because they still worked. Phonics and phonemic awareness certainly aren't new either. Phonics, after being shunned and then given a very small role to play in the decoding strategies, is back front and center in literacy instruction. I'm sure you've noticed. Great teachers just work around whatever the latest fad is and try their hardest to keep true to what they know really works. For example, when one of my best friend's school districts adopted a popular literacy program that we knew was trendy but hugely ineffective, we first commiserated and then we plotted how she was going to teach effectively while still giving a nod to the ridiculous curriculum that she was required to teach. Been there, done that, right? We all do that in varying degrees because we know what works and what isn't working. You might try out something new and then figure out it's not working. If it's not working, don't do it. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your students' time. We have lost too much time already with COVID. It's time to get serious and really understand what works and what doesn't work, and stick to it. Well, the latest and greatest approach in literacy is the science of reading. When you put the word science before reading, it sounds so official, so weighty, doesn't it? So what exactly is the science of reading, and is it the real deal or just another education bandwagon? The science of reading is years of research into how the brain processes language and learns to read and write. What parts of the brain do what and how they communicate. It takes all of this and puts it into instructional models and practices. And hopefully, it gives us some insight into how to most effectively teach the main or essential components of literacy. The actual science is good, the idea is solid, and many of the approaches are very good as well. There are 5 elements, or sometimes called pillars, of the science of reading: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary and language, and comprehension. As I'm sure you know, there are already lots of interpretations of this concept out there in Teacherland, from publishers to TPT to teachers, schools, and districts creating their own plans. Now, just because something says the science of reading doesn't mean it's good or something you should use in your classroom. Buyer beware. Many publishers and curriculum creators take a part of this whole approach and sell it as the science of reading. So you might get the phonics piece, and if you're lucky, maybe the comprehension, but not the other pillars. And it's okay to use different pieces from different places, but just know it's a piece of the science of reading and not the whole shebang. I guess I'm saying just know what you're paying for. So where should you begin if you really want to apply the concepts of science of reading to your instruction? Phonemic awareness comes first in students learning to read. If students don't have this in place, they will struggle with reading and quite often with writing as well. This piece consists of recognizing that words are made up of sounds and that we can hear and separate and manipulate them, breaking, replacing sounds to make new words, etc. Essentially, this is a training for your students in auditory processing, hearing, distinguishing, and manipulating individual sounds and words without any letters or symbols attached. And you might think that because you're teaching, say, 2nd grade, that your students have this down because they're reading and they're writing. But if you look closely at how well your students are reading and how well your students are writing and the kinds of problems that they're having, you might discover that they actually might need some of this phonemic awareness support. It's never too late to go back and teach it. So phonics is next. This is where we're matching symbols, i.e. letters and groups of letters, with sounds. It also includes all the skills of breaking, replacing, blending, etc. that were practiced in phonemic awareness. Phonics also includes using working memory. It's a higher order thinking skill to be able to use that working memory and apply it as you're going. It's great to know many sight words, but real reading requires us to decode, and that means using our working memory to apply phonics. You can help students develop the skill with proper phonics instruction and practice. Now, I said first and second with phonemic awareness and phonics, but in tandem with teaching phonemic awareness and then phonics, and even before students can read on their own, we began working on comprehension. If you know me, you know I teach comprehension concepts whole class, and then once students can read, we also work on applying them in small groups and in individual reading. But I still teach and reinforce them whole class, even once students are able to read. The same is true of vocabulary and language. You don't have to wait until students can read to teach vocabulary and language skills. In fact, you should not wait. Students need the background knowledge great vocabulary provides to be good readers, and they need to understand how language works. They need grammar and syntax and all the pieces, so don't hold out on your students. And the last pillar or piece is fluency. This is the piece that many teachers get hung up on. It's putting the pieces all together to read smoothly and with expression appropriate to the text. It's really hard for students to practice fluency when they're still learning to read. I think we ask students to practice this way too soon with books. We just need to give them a hot second to learn to do some basic reading. However, you can model fluency, talk about it, and have students practice retelling with fluency until they have a bit of reading practice under their belts. Then you can start adding in some fluency with texts that they're actually very comfortable with. That's the best place to teach fluency. It's really hard to read fluently when you're still struggling through the text. If you have a text that you know and you can read well, that is the place for students to practice that fluency because they aren't struggling with the other pieces, and so they can focus on the fluent part. Okay, so while many educators are throwing out the sight word practice as they jump into this approach of teaching, don't you love it when we throw the baby out with the bathwater? I still believe we need a bit of sight word knowledge as well. In kindergarten and first grade, I would try to get through the first 100 fry words. That is probably the best basis that you can give your students. After that, the return on investment of time begins to wane. You can do more, sure, but I wouldn't spend time on more than the first 200 or 300 words. I don't think the return on investment is worth it, and quite honestly, a lot of the words as you get further along are very decodable. And those are the words that they don't need to be memorizing, they can decode them. So we really want to make sure we're focusing on that first 100, and after that, see what your time frame looks like, and you can decide what you want to do. One last thought, reading and writing go together. Don't wait to write. I know we've been talking a lot about reading through this because reading really is so very important, but so is writing. Decoding and encoding are different pieces of the same puzzle and use different parts of the brain. Real understanding comes from practicing both. It embeds the knowledge more deeply in the brain. Start with wordless books and writing picture stories if your students are not reading yet, and move to adding in labels as they gain some phonics knowledge. From there, you can begin to add more and more words until they are writing sentences. It will happen so much faster than you think it will. Using sentence frames is appropriate for a while, but don't leave those training wheels on too long or they become a crutch or worse. A need for perfection or a fear of making mistakes, and we don't want to instill that in our students. So be careful with those sentence frames. I am all about them, especially using them as answer frames, orally, and those kinds of things. But when we're writing, we have to be careful about watching for when our students need those training wheels to come off when they're ready to fly. Because if we leave them on too long, it really does hinder them in the worst way. And it's really hard to get students past those fears of making mistakes and of perfectionism. If you're looking for more information on some of these approaches and where a lot of the research has stemmed out of, you can look at anything that is an Orton-Gilliam-based program. They are clear, direct, multisensory, and sequential in their teaching. I love them. I have loved them for as long as I can remember. They're very effective, and they're something that has been used with students with dyslexia very successfully for years and years and years. And the knowledge you gain from these programs can benefit all students. I love Barton Reading, Linda Mood Bell, Wilson Reading. They are all great programs. I'll link a few in the show notes. If you're looking for some more information, you can also listen to episode number 38, How Teaching Phonics Will Set Your Students Up for Long-Term Reading Success, and number 35, What is Phonemic Awareness and Why is it so important? I have a free phonemic awareness cheat sheet for you. I'll link that in the show notes. So that's it for this episode of the Teach Joyfully podcast, my teacher friends. My sincere thanks to you, my listeners, for tuning in, and for those of you who have taken the time to post a review, email me your thoughts, or DM me on Instagram with your feedback and topic requests. You can find the show notes and all the resources mentioned in the episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. And remember, a happy teacher is a good teacher. Until next time, teach joyfully and take care of you.